Had Mercedes really returned? Or was everything an illusion built on a legal loophole that the FIA had just destroyed? Because in a matter of hours, what seemed like a solid recovery in qualifying has become one of the biggest technical blows of the season. A change that not only affects performance, but calls into question absolutely everything we saw in the last races. The FIA has said enough. It has closed the crack. And with this, it has eliminated the famous MGUK trick. That system that allowed Mercedes to squeeze more power right at the most important moment of the lap, where everything is decided. A small detail in appearance, but devastating in reality. Because in Formula 1, a few thousandths are nothing, until you get pole position. And here's the key to it all. Mercedes wasn't breaking the rules, she was interpreting them better than anyone else. They had found a way to maintain maximum energy deployment when the rest were already beginning to lose performance, sacrificing something that simply does not matter in classification. But now that is over. Without warning, without room for adaptation. And just before a key race, which leaves a question that could completely change the order of the grid. What really remains of Mercedes when you take away its greatest advantage? Because if this trick was the difference, then what is coming could be a real earthquake in Formula 1. It all starts with regulations that, in theory, were designed to make Formula 1 safer, but that ended up opening the door to one of the biggest legal loopholes of the season. With the arrival of the new 2026 regulations, the FIA introduced a key change in the operation of the MGUK, the electrical system responsible for delivering additional power to the cars. The idea was clear: avoid sudden differences in speed on the straight by forcing the teams to reduce power progressively, in controlled steps, a kind of gradual descent to maintain stability on the track. On paper, it all made sense. No one could just shut down the system cold turkey, or at least that's what it seemed like. Because within the regulation there was an exception. A small back door designed only for critical situations, the so-called emergency mode. This system allowed all MGUK power to be instantly cut off in the event of a technical failure, going from maximum performance to zero in a single instant. But of course, in Formula 1, every line of the regulations is analyzed to the extreme. And Mercedes, along with Red Bull, saw something that the rest had not yet exploited. Because that penalty that accompanied the emergency mode, that 60-second block without being able to use the electrical system, was devastating in the race, but completely irrelevant in qualifying. That's where the trick comes from. Instead of managing the energy as the regulations dictated, these teams began to push the MGUK to the absolute limit during the entire flying lap, keeping the 350 kilowatts active for longer than allowed. And just before crossing the finish line, they activated the emergency shutdown. Result: they squeezed all the available energy at the exact moment where it matters most, and the penalty came when the lap was already over. It was brilliant, legal, and extremely effective. We're talking about a gain of between 50 and 100 extra kilowatts for a few key seconds, enough to make the difference between leaving first or getting stuck in traffic. And in a grid as tight as the current one, where teams like McLaren dominate the championship but Mercedes was closing the gap little by little, that type of advantage not only adds, it defines results. The most worrying thing was not only that it worked, but that it began to repeat itself. From Australia to Japan, this pattern began to appear consistently, raising suspicions within the paddock. Rival engineers began to notice that something didn't add up in the data, that certain cars were maintaining electric power longer than should be possible. And when someone in Formula 1 finds something like that, it doesn't take long for it to become a technical war. Ferrari was one of the first to notice. And as often happens in this sport, when a team cannot replicate an advantage, it puts pressure on it to disappear. What no one expected is that the FIA's reaction would be so quick, nor so forceful. Because at that moment, what seemed like a simple, clever interpretation of the rules was about to become the biggest turning point of the season. And then, the scandal breaks out. What until then was an open secret within the paddock begins to take real shape when the data begins to not add up. It is not just any suspicion. It is a repeated, constant anomaly, impossible to ignore. Ferrari takes the first step. Its engineers, analyzing telemetry and energy deployment comparisons, detect that both Mercedes and Red Bull are doing something different, something that does not fit with the normal behavior of the MGUK under the new regulations. And this is where the story changes levels. Because in Formula 1, when a team directly points out a possible illegal advantage or even a gray area, it does not do so without evidence. He does it because he knows there is something big behind it. From that moment, the pressure on the FIA begins to grow. It's not just a complaint, it's a direct threat to competitive balance. Because while some teams follow the mandatory progressive deployment, others are managing to maintain maximum power until the last moment, earning those thousandths that define an entire classification. And the most uncomfortable thing for the FIA, all this was happening in front of them, race after race, from Australia to Japan, without intervention, without penalty, until the point of no return arrives. The Federation reviews the system, analyzes the use of emergency mode, and understands what is really happening. It is not a failure, it is a deliberate exploitation of the regulations, an interpretation taken to the limit that completely breaks the spirit of the norm. And that's where they make the most important decision so far this season. Forbidden. Without detours. Without nuances. Without allowing him to continue even one more race. The FIA eliminates the possibility of using this emergency shutdown for strategic purposes in classification, definitively closing the door that Mercedes had known how to take advantage of better than anyone. But what is really shocking is not the ban itself. It's time. Because this decision comes just before Miami, at a point where the teams have already developed their cars around this type of optimizations. There is no reaction time. There is no room to redesign. It's a direct hit. And for Mercedes especially, it is devastating. Because they had been building their recovery little by little, relying on every possible small technical advantage. George Russell was maximizing performance, the car was beginning to respond, and now, from one day to the next, they lose one of their most decisive weapons. The question is no longer whether the trick was brilliant. The question now is, how much did they depend on him? Because if that advantage was the difference between fighting for pole or being left out of the front row, then what's coming for Mercedes could be much more than a simple loss of performance. It can be a direct fall in the Formula One hierarchy. And meanwhile, there are teams that watch silently, knowing that this decision could change everything in their favor. And now comes the hardest part, the consequences. Because it's one thing to discover the trick, it's quite another to suddenly take it away from the teams that had built part of their performance around it. Mercedes is the big one. All that progress that they had been showing in qualifying, that feeling that they were slowly returning to the real fight for pole, now remains under suspicion. Because without that extra power in the final moments of the lap, the W15 loses precisely where it had improved the most, single-lap performance. And in Formula One, losing in qualifying changes everything. Starting a few positions further back not only affects the result on Saturday, it completely conditions Sunday's race. Traffic, compromised strategy, tire wear, inability to execute the real pace. It's a domino effect. But this is where the impact becomes even more interesting, because this doesn't just affect Mercedes. Red Bull also used this system. However, the difference is clear. They have other weapons. They have a car that remains competitive in multiple scenarios, with a solid foundation that does not depend exclusively on a technical exploit. Mercedes, on the other hand, was using every little advantage to close the gap. And now, that gap can open again. Meanwhile, there is one team watching all of this with a silent smile. McLaren. The current champions of the championship, who already had a balanced and consistent car, now see how two of their main rivals lose a key tool without them having to do anything at all. Ferrari, for its part, not only manages to eliminate an advantage that it could not replicate, but also reaffirms its role within the paddock as one of the most influential teams on a political and technical level. This is not just engineering, it is also power. And this is where everything is redefined. Because from now on, every qualifying session will be a real test. No tricks. Without extreme interpretations. Without that extra margin that made the difference in the last meters. Now we will see the truth. We'll see which cars really have the pace. Which drivers can make a difference without hidden help. And which teams were depending more than they wanted to admit. The great unknown remains in the air. Will Mercedes collapse? Or will it be able to reinvent itself once again? Because if Formula One has shown anything throughout its history, it is that when a door closes, the great teams always find another way to return. But this time, the blow was direct. And the consequences are just beginning. In the end, what seemed like a simple technical innovation has become a turning point that can redefine the entire season. Mercedes has not only lost a trick, it has lost a key piece of its recovery. A tool that, although legal at the time, made a real difference at the most critical moment of the weekend. Qualifying. And in a championship where everything is so tight, where the differences are minimal and every detail counts, removing that advantage is not a minor adjustment, it is changing the balance of power. Now Formula One enters a new phase. One where there are no longer gray areas to exploit in this regard. where each team will have to demonstrate its real performance without relying on interpretations at the limit of the regulations. A phase where we will see who was really prepared to fight at the top, and who depended more than it seemed. Because what Mercedes did was brilliant, but what the FIA did was definitive. He closed the door. And when that happens in Formula One, there are only two options left: adapt or fall. The big question is not whether Mercedes will lose performance. The real question is whether they have the ability to reinvent themselves quickly enough to not disappear from the fight. Because while some lose, others are ready to take advantage. And what comes from now could be the beginning of a new order on the grid. Let me know in the comments what you think about all this.